All right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining joining our session this evening, round 2 of NAR Talks, where we are going to have a great conversation with Jeff Young. As soon as we can get him onto the Zoom, we're gonna have a great conversation with Jeff about his strategies and tactics around buyer agency agreements. While we wait to get Jeff into the room, we'll talk a little bit about why exactly this is so important. And I am going to do a good job of not speculating too much, and first and foremost reminding everybody that as it relates to everything that has been in the news and everything that we've heard from our leadership in Keller Williams Realty International and different talking heads in the real estate industry, nothing has been officially settled yet, and everything is still pending as it relates to the settlements that all of the news articles and all of the information was about. But what is expected is that buyer representation is going to be a big part, buyer representation agreements, a big part of whatever settlement comes down the pike. And so, sorry, just working on getting Jeff in the Zoom room. Sorry, gang. And so we thought it would be best. We thought it would be best to get everybody on a call and have a conversation with one of the greats. As those of you who saw in my Facebook post, somebody who's been getting these documents signed for over 30 years. Saw a great meme not too long ago. And it was talking about, there are two types of agents in the marketplace. Ones that are really excited about what's going on, as hard as that is to believe, or let's say ones that are not at all disrupted by some of the suggestions and the suggested settlements, and then others that are really scared and concerned. It's understandable to be on either side of those, given where some of us are at in the industry. But the goal of tonight, specifically to the number one proposed item in the settlement agreements, which have not been accepted yet, was around buyer representation agreement. And so you are now seeing spotlit on your screen a young man named Jeff. Jeff Young, as it were. And Jeff, before we get into this, why don't you tell us all who you are? What's your backstory in real estate? How long have you been doing what you're doing, and why have you been doing it so long? Why do you love it?
Okay, so thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure to be with everybody tonight, and I hope that everything we talk about will be really, really helpful. I was in the commercial development and construction industry for many years. My wife, Terry, who many of you know, was a standalone agent until 2003 when she asked me to drive her to a real estate conference. I met Keller Williams and other agents from all over the country that were selling 200, 300, 400 homes a year. Totally willing to share how they were doing that. I said, I'm quitting my job. We're going to become a husband and wife team. And at the same time, I had 3 kids in college, couldn't afford a long learning curve, met a real estate coach and hired him on the spot. And that's what launched the Young team. One of the very first things that our coach did was set up an 800 number, a IVR system, which basically had a sign writer on all of our for sale signs that said, for 24-hour recorded information, call 1-800, the rest you know. And buyers at that time didn't want to talk to a pushy salesperson. They wanted the recorded information. Many times they told me I was an idiot because I did not include the price of the house. And I never told them that I wasn't an idiot, although we did that on purpose because we wanted them to call, because that had captured their phone number and I could call them back. introduce myself and tell them that I noticed they had called our real estate hotline. And as a courtesy, blah, blah, blah. And we use something that some of you may have heard of called LP Mama, which stands for the key things you need to find out from a buyer on the phone to qualify them as a real buyer. And the other thing we did was the whole system was designed to identify what we call A buyers, which means somebody that's ready to buy and willing to buy a house, wants to buy a house in the next 30 days, get under contract, and is either a cash buyer or is pre-approved. And when you got somebody like that on the phone, the closing was, well, based on the information you've given me, here's what I recommend we do. I recommend we meet at my office, go over the home buying process, do a market overview of wherever they wanted to buy, and then go look at some homes. How does that sound? The whole key there is if they were really an A buyer, they should say, that sounds great, because no other real estate agents were talking to them that way. Nobody was offering them professional counseling and the outcome of finding the right house and getting it under contract. Now, here's the key. When they came to the office for what we used to call a buyer intake interview, we now call it a buyer strategy session. The whole key was, as all of you know, that was our first significant face-to-face contact. We had to present and get them to sign and give us a copy and keep a copy of the consumer guide, which I'm sure all of you are doing when you have your first significant contact with a prospective client. The second part of that was, after we went over the consumer guide, which talked about a listing agreement creating agency for sellers, or a buyer representation agreement creating agency for buyers. Once we did that, I'd already mentioned that they're going to be signing a buyer representation agreement, just like sellers sign a listing agreement. And then I'd say, now let's take a look at the buyer representation agreement. I would present all of that to them. It explained what our obligations to them were, why they were hiring us. It told them how long the contract was for. Our contract happens to have a 48-hour easy exit, meaning if they think they're stuck with us, if they think we're too busy to show them houses, if they think we're not listening, they can fire us. Therefore, we have to earn their business every day. And when you offer that to a qualified A buyer, when you say at the end, are you ready to put us to work? Just sign here. They always sign because they want your help. They want to buy a house. So that's how I got into this. That's why I've been doing it for the last 20 plus years, because I love doing it. Thank God my sons haven't fired Terry and me. We have the privilege of not retiring. And I love what I do, whether working with buyers or sellers. But for tonight's purpose, we are talking specifically about how and why do you offer a buyer the opportunity to sign a buyer representation agreement and hire you to get the outcome they want.
Incredible stuff, Jeff. It's so much you gave me in that intro that we're going to dive into together. The first thing I want to say is, if your son ever gets the idea that he wants to get rid of you and Terry, I will hire you in a heartbeat.
I appreciate that.
You won't go unemployed for long, my friend. So a lot of great things that you put in there. And you mentioned last week when you and I were chatting, or maybe it was earlier this week, why you felt so comfortable having them signed. At the time, you had quit your job and hired a coach, right?
Yep.
And because you said, let's just really quick unpack why hire a coach. It's going to be redundant for you, but for many of us that even currently have a coach or have access to a coach, why were you so hell-bent on having one before you had even really sold a house?
Well, because every Keller Williams agent knows that success leaves tracks. And one of the quotes from the MREA is, if I have seen farther than others, it's because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. And one of our core values, if you will, is if you want to do something better, find somebody that's doing it at the level you want to and copy them, imitate them, learn from them, tap them, beg, borrow, or steal their information. It's as simple as that. Then you just got to do it.
So your coach told you to get these signed, or did you know about, like, I mean, you know, you've been doing it for 2 decades, more than 2 decades now. Was it just like, Jeff, you got to get these signed, or were you like, I need to get these signed for myself?
When I hired the coach, Terry was a standalone agent. Terry had never, ever used a buyer representation agreement. It was all about, sphere of influence, and a random call. It was just, smiling and engaging and building rapport. But when I started working with the coach, he was coaching probably 40 of the top 100 Wall Street Journal real estate teams back then. This is 2003. So these teams were selling 200, 300, 400 homes a year. They had buyer's agents. They had inside sales agents. They built big teams just like the MREA recommends you do. Okay. So basically, one of the things they were all doing was getting these buyer representation agreements signed. Some agents call them buyer loyalty agreements. I really don't prefer that because I'm not asking you for your loyalty. I'm asking you to stick with me as long as I can provide what you want and need. I don't want loyalty.
Yeah.
I just do my job and help you get what you want. And when I do that, more often than not, I will have earned a Google 5-star review. Our team has over 1,000 of them now. And it's just because we focus on providing a very high level of service. Yeah. And the buyer rep agreement basically promises them that. We don't ask them to sign a buyer representation agreement to lock them up. Just like with a listing agreement, some brokers in town sign 6 months or longer. And if you feel like you've made a mistake or you just change your mind and don't want to sell your house, you're stuck. Until that agreement is null and void, expired, you're in it. Well, we don't feel that way. We feel that we have to earn your business every day. And as long as we conduct ourselves that way, why would anybody ever quit? Why would anybody ever leave?
Yeah. And then, I mean, I remember you kind of alluded to it in the opening. You have 3 kids. Your whole livelihood at this point, and theirs for that matter, was dependent on you being successful in real estate. And you said, I didn't have time to go out with people that just wanted to see houses.
Exactly.
And so a great way to determine whether or not somebody is serious about the opportunity that you're going to present them with as you go see homes is going to have no problem signing that. Right?
Yep. And in all honesty, most of the time when I get a random call from a prospective buyer, either they've called other agents that don't call them back, or they've actually looked at a couple of houses with another agent that is too busy or is not listening to them, who never even presented a consumer guide, shame, let alone a buyer representation agreement. So in a case like that, what happens is, because I've done this literally thousands of times, and I believe so strongly that everything we do is for the benefit of the client, for the buyer. It's not for me. I don't sign a buyer rep agreement for me. It doesn't do me a damn bit of good until I help them buy a house. We don't charge a retainer fee. We don't get paid up front. We only get paid when they close.
Jeff, can you say that again? Because I think that there's a really strong script there. Now, there's a lot of folks, right, wrong, or indifferent, that are nervous about having to have the conversation about somebody signing a document so that they can show them a home that then, is something they haven't done ever before, regardless of whether they should have been or could have been. But what did you say again about what it's more important for them to have it than for you to have it?
Yeah, and I explain it this way, and I'm so grateful, one, that we have to present the consumer guide first, because that explains the different relationships we have with our clients, sellers, buyers, and on and on and on. The second thing that I'm grateful about is that our consumer guide talks about representing sellers first, because most people out there that have heard of a listing agreement. So when I say that sometimes we represent sellers, and when we do, we sign a listing agreement, you've heard of those, right?
Yes,
and they all shake their head yes. And then I say, now when a seller signs that listing agreement, it creates an agency relationship between us. and a fiduciary responsibility from us to you. We have to look out for your best interests, get the best price and terms the market will bear for the sale of your home. And anything you tell us, we have to keep confidential. That makes sense, doesn't it? I'm always asking for buy-in, because if I'm going to get pushback, I want them to tell me right then and there, right?
Yeah.
So now everybody's heard about a listing agreement with rare exception, which now makes talking about paragraph 2 super easy, because watch what happens. Okay, now paragraph 2 talks about sometimes we as licensed real estate agents represent buyers. And that's what you want to do today. You said you want to buy a house in Mayfield Heights. So what we're going to do is we're going to sign a buyer representation agreement. It's just like a listing agreement for a buyer. And when we sign that, it's going to create an agency relationship between us, a fiduciary responsibility from us. We have to look out for your best interest, help you find the right house and get it under contract at the best price, terms and conditions the market will bear. And anything you tell us, we have to keep confidential unless you give us permission to disclose. That makes sense, doesn't it? Well, they just agreed it makes sense to sign a listing agreement. Now I just said why we're going to sign the buyer representation agreement. Why would they change their mind? And if they do, they're going to tell me what the problem is, and I'll address it.
Yeah.
So now the rest is easy.
Yeah, what a great way to, take the challenge or take the obstacle and actually turn it on its head, right? You're signing this to sign me up as a fiduciary, right?
Exactly.
Act in your best interest, respect confidentiality, and work on your behalf. Without it, I can't do those things, and I won't do those things.
Well, I could.
You could,
but you can't count on it.
That's right. And how's that? Anybody who says that they'll do it without signing it, I don't know how reliable that could be.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now you brought up A, B, and C buyers. This is now a way to delineate all your buyers. How do you use the buyer representation agreement to do that? You told me that like an A buyer is going to have no problem signing it, but how does it really filter out the B and the C? Like, what do those conversations look like? And how do I know that just because they signed it, they might not be a good buyer?
All right. This is not me saying this. This came from my coach 20 plus years ago. And what he said was, my goal for you and your business is for you to be so busy with A buyers and sellers that you would never want to invest face-to-face time with a B or a C buyer until they're ready to buy. Now, if I'm brand new in the market, I don't have any business and I don't know who to call. If somebody calls and says they want to look at houses, the common reaction is, when can I meet you? I've got gas in my car, I'm ready to go. But the reality is, as you build a reliable business plan and business model, when you talk to a B or a C buyer, the better plan is to put them on a email notification system through the MLS, a portal, with their criteria, stay in touch by phone until they move time-wise into an A buyer slot. That's when you set the buyer strategy session. Before then, it's kind of premature. And B and C buyers, when they say, well, can't you just show me this house? My response is always the same. I could, but it wouldn't be very professional of me, because if you see this house and fall in love with it and you're not ready to buy, it won't be available when you are ready. And then what's going to happen is every house we look at, you're going to compare to the one that you didn't get.
Yeah. Yeah. Or you could ask them if they were selling their home, would they want people just coming in to look?
Yeah, I'm not sure buyers are all that sensitive about that.
Sure.
But nevertheless, I always make it about the benefit to the buyer.
Right.
And the benefit is, if I show you that house today and it's everything you think it is and you fall in love with it, unless somehow miraculously you're ready to write an offer, it's not going to be available when you're ready in a month or 2 months.
Yeah.
So let's, why do that? Why not look at houses when we're ready? Because very often the first house you walk into is the one you fall in love with and want to buy.
Yeah.
No, and notice what I just did there. Talk about setting expectations. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. We also study DISC personality types. And C personalities are critical thinkers. They're often doctors, engineers, accountants, and they process information. They don't care about anybody's opinion. They just want facts and data to process. Right. And they sometimes think they need to look at 50 houses before they can make a decision. But I even have a script for that. Mike, if I showed you 50 houses, that would be so unprofessional in me, because by the time you looked at the 50th house, you'd be wanting something that was a combination of everything you'd seen, and it doesn't exist in the market. So why don't we get your criteria under control, really understand it, and look at some houses that meet your criteria? Because I have a feeling if you're like many of our clients, you're going to find the right house and get it under contract after looking at 5, maybe 10 houses. Again, setting expectations.
Yeah, I want to, that's a wonderful way to set the expectation that it doesn't take 6 months or 60 homes. Well, I want to circle back to something you said, because I don't want what you articulated so well, Jeff, to be misinterpreted. You only want to work, you only can work with A buyers because an A buyer is ready, willing, and able. And that doesn't mean that we wait for B and C buyers to get ready. You mentioned you just continue to check in and see if they're still on the same timeline, because somebody who wants to buy in 6 months, in 4 months is now an A buyer.
Yeah. There's all kinds of easy conversations in that regard. Hey, Mike, it's Jeff. I know you didn't want to buy until this summer, but a house that meets your criteria is going to be coming on the market in a week or two. And I was just curious, has anything changed that might enable you to buy a house if it's the right one now? No, thanks, Jeff. I'm still on schedule for summer. Great. I'll check back in a few weeks, see if anything's changed, give you an update on interest rates, whatever. It's just having conversations, staying in touch, staying interested, and providing something of value. That way they won't be looking for other agents. And as long as you stay in touch and keep giving them what they need, they'll be there when they're ready. You'll be there when they're ready.
Jeff, you had indicated you changed from a buyer intake interview to a buyer strategy session, just what you call it. Tell me a little bit more about that. If I'm an agent that's on the call and I'm thinking, well, I need to do those, like, what's the methodology and the mentality around it? Just the name first and then what you're talking about.
Here's what's interesting. There was a time, for those of you that have been in the business a while, 2008, 2009 through 2012, sellers often had to bring money to the table to sell a house. And there were plenty of buyers, and it was a buyer's market back then. The reality is, in the last couple of years, when we've gone through the market we have, where a house that comes on the market day one, priced right and in good condition, has all kinds of showings, multiple offers, and by day 3, they've got a deadline for highest and best. In a situation like that, a buyer has to have a strategy. And one of the things we do at the buyer strategy session is, because we do a market overview, and what we are doing currently is we explain to a buyer that the market is very situational. Homes that come on day 1, priced right, showing well, are probably going to go into multiple offers. And if that happens, if you have the stomach to compete in that kind of an arena, we have several strategies we can suggest you might want to consider. I never tell a buyer what they should or shouldn't do. It's not my decision, it's theirs. I give them ideas about what their options are so that they can always choose. I don't ever want to put myself in a situation where a year later I get a letter from a lawyer that says, you told our client that they should, you should have known better. So I'm pretty careful about always saying, here are your different options. For example, we always recommend that a buyer get a professional home inspection. And yet most of us who have been in the business for a year or 2 or 3 know that in multiple offer situations, many buyers were waiving the opportunity to do that. So what I always say to a buyer is, look, if you're in a multiple offer situation, you may want to consider not doing a home inspection. And if you're thinking of that, because we always recommend you do, but that may not put you in the best situation in a multiple offer situation, consider the following. If the home is owner occupied, if they've been in it for only a couple of years and possibly they had a home inspection 2 years ago, and if the house is relatively newer, and if it doesn't look like anything seriously wrong, you might want to ask yourself, what's the risk if I don't do an inspection now? And then I hired an inspector after closing, that they would find anything really serious. And if the answer is that is not likely, then maybe that's something you might want to consider. I'm not recommending it, but it's one of the decisions you're going to have to make. It's just all about telling them what's going on in the market. And that's why it's called a strategy session. Yeah. Additionally, if it's a home that's been on the market for 30, 45, 60 days or more, doesn't mean anything's wrong with it. It may have been overpriced. It may not have been marketed well. Maybe the agent took the pictures on their smartphone and they don't look so hot. In a case like that, it doesn't mean anything's wrong with the house. It just, for whatever reason, hasn't sold. In that case, you may be able to offer list price or less. You may be in a better negotiating position relative to inspections, etc. And that's why we say it's very situational and it's a strategy session.
I like that. Jeff, when it comes to the times that you've presented the buyer representation agreement, what's the percentage? What's your conversion rate? What percentage of people don't sign it, or what percentage do sign it, or like what's the pushback that you've gotten? What are the objections you typically handle?
So probably the biggest objection, which amazingly I only heard once or twice, is I wasn't planning on signing anything today.
Okay.
And I respond, okay, but you did say you want to buy a house, right? So we have 3 houses scheduled to see after this set meeting. If one of those houses is the right house, you'll want to write an offer, won't you? Yes. Okay, and you know that to buy a house, you have to sign a contract and other documents? Yeah. Okay, so if we do find the right house today, you are prepared to sign something, correct? Yes. Okay, on top of that, this consumer guide is information only. And Ohio law requires that I give it to you, review it with you, and ask you to sign a copy so I can keep it in my file, because periodically the Ohio Division of Real Estate shows up unannounced to audit our files. And when they see a signed consumer guide, it demonstrates that I have fulfilled my responsibility to you under Ohio law. That makes sense, doesn't it? Great. So I know you weren't prepared to sign anything today. You probably didn't know you needed to. But now that I've explained it, are you willing to sign this consumer guide? Oh, okay, sure. Great. Now let's talk about the buyer representation agreement. I know you said you weren't planning on signing anything today, and I know you don't. I've had a lot of clients, buyers whose family said, whatever you do, don't sign anything. But, you know, when you think about it, to buy a house, you got to sign a purchase agreement and other documents. So don't sign anything is really not good advice if you want to buy a house. Now, our buyer representation agreement is a contract. And we always tell every buyer that's going to sign one, if you have a family attorney and you want to show it to them, feel free. However, please understand this is all written in plain English. There's none of that legal boilerplate stuff. And most of our buyers, truthfully, just read over it themselves and sign it without getting an attorney involved. Second of all, as you know, even though this is a contract, you can fire us at any time if you're not happy with us, if you feel like we're not doing our job. And you understand the benefit of signing it because it creates that agency relationship and fiduciary responsibility. So what do you think now? Do you think maybe it's a good idea to sign this, or do you think you still ought to hold off? And usually they sign. Last but not least, I think one time buyers, one was living in town, they were engaged. The other fiance was living out of town, came in for the weekend, met at our office on a Saturday. We scheduled 3 showings. The guy absolutely refused to sign. I don't remember if he signed the buyer rep, but he refused to sign I'm sorry, I don't recall if he signed the consumer guide, but he absolutely refused to sign the buyer rep agreement. I made a business decision on the spot, and I said, okay, no problem. We've already scheduled 3 showings this afternoon. Let's go look at them. After we're done, if you want to write an offer on one of them, we can do that. Or if you want to keep working with us, you'll sign the buyer rep agreement. And if you're not ready to do that, we'll part company. No harm, no foul, no problem. But remember, very rarely do we schedule a buyer strategy session with a buyer that's not an A buyer.
Right.
And if they really are an A buyer, they need somebody's help. And the good news is, because I've done this so many times, Terry and I, when we do the buyer strategy session, I don't need a consumer guide to present it to you. I pretty much know it by heart. I've done this thousands of times. And I believe in my heart of hearts that everything I am presenting to the buyers for their benefit. And as we go through all this stuff, we are constantly reinforcing the success we've had in the past. And it could be us, it could be our team, it could be our market center. It doesn't mean that I did it personally, but we keep talking about how we had a buyer that was in a multiple offer situation because we've done this so many times, because we're so good at getting information from the listing agent to find out what's important to the seller. And we keep reinforcing the success we've had and the results we've provided to our clients. So by the end of the session, when it's time to sign the buyer rep agreement, they want to sign it. They want our help. They want to work with us. And if they don't, that's okay too. They can go find somebody else.
Certainly. Jeff, quick question about your buyer rep agreement. Are you using the office ones, or is it a young team special? What do you got?
I'm ashamed to tell you, I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
But
which is all right. I just wondered, what does it say about commissions, right? Because that's going to be a big part of this. And I know ours has a clause about commissions in it. And I want to make sure that, there is at least that apples to apples.
Yeah. So in the buyer rep agreement, up until now, and actually up until July, I'm anticipating.
Yes.
The only talk about compensation is the paragraph. There's the first paragraph is the term of the contract.
Yep.
Which could be 6 months, but I usually make it for only 90 days. And I explained it doesn't take that long to find and buy a house. If we need to, we can always extend, but why would we make this longer if you want to buy a house in the next 30 days?
Right.
If somebody wants 6 months, I would be a little nervous that maybe they don't feel confident they can help you buy a house. The next paragraph talks about our having a senior moment here, our obligations to the buyer. In other words, why would they hire Terry and Jeff Young and the Young team in Keller Williams Greater Metropolitan? And I go on and on about, our experience in the market, our real estate knowledge, our negotiating skills, our reputation with other agents and brokers who love to do business with us because they know we bring qualified buyers and we get our deals done, and on and on and on. And I say, for all those reasons, that's why you might choose to hire Terry and Jeff Young and the Young team in Keller Williams Greater Metropolitan. The next paragraph talks about the buyer's obligations to us. And when I say that, I laugh and go, you didn't know you had any obligations, did you? And they almost always chuckle and smile. And I say, there's only 2 of them, and they're really straightforward. The first one is, be as open and honest with us about what you're looking for. The better you communicate with us, the better our relationship, the better we can help you find it. And I believe the key to all great relationships is great communication. And then the second one is when you're driving around and you see a for sale sign in the yard, don't call the number on the sign. You'll be calling the listing agent or listing broker who represents the seller. Remember, they signed a listing agreement. They have a fiduciary responsibility to the seller, not you. So if you call that listing agent directly, anything you tell them, they can tell the seller because they don't owe you any confidentiality. Call us, we'll set up the showing, and that way you'll have representation and somebody looking out for your best interest. That is what you want, isn't it? And they should say yes. And I say, great, that's all your obligations are to us. And then the next paragraph talks about for sale by owners and a retainer fee. And I still, to this day, am a little bit uncomfortable about the for sale by owner conversation, although I discuss it because it's in there. But I say, let's work from the bottom up. I say, it says we charge a retainer fee of, and I put a 0 in there because we don't charge a retainer fee. Some agents do.
Yep.
And that's their prerogative. We only get paid when you actually close on your house.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is current conversation. It may have to be modified come July or leading up to July once we understand what's actually happening. But whatever it is, it's an opportunity for us to revalidate our value proposition and explain why we do what we do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I explain that we don't charge a retainer fee. And then I talk about a for sale by owner. And I tell them this happens very rarely. But if you see a for sale by owner sign, your inclination is going to be pull in the driveway, knock on the door, introduce yourself, say, I'm looking for a house in your market. What are you asking? And we don't recommend you do that. And here's why. Notice that I just said, here's what we recommend. And here's why. I never tell a person what I recommend if I don't have a justification for recommending it.
Mm-hmm.
Because that way, if there's any objections, that should answer the objection or overcome it. And if it doesn't, then I want to hear about it. So I can dispel their concerns. Anyhow, I say the reason I don't recommend you go directly to a for sale by owner is number one, most for sale by owners think their houses are worth more than they really are in the market. Number two, they have no experience or skill at selling and negotiating real estate contracts. And three, if they were really motivated to sell their house, they probably would have hired a professional broker, which they haven't. So for all those reasons, if you really think that's the house you want, call us with a telephone number and address. We'll call, introduce ourselves as a licensed real estate agent working with a qualified buyer. And I'll ask them one simple question, 3 parts. If I were to show your home to a qualified buyer and bring you an acceptable offer, would you agree to pay us a commission? Every time I've asked that, about 75 to 80% of the time, they say, yes, I want to sell my house. Sometimes they say no, and that's okay too. It just means we have to deal with the situation differently. So basically, that's all we, before I go to the for sale by owner, when we talk about the retainer fee, and I say at that point, actually, the way real estate is structured, when the seller signs a listing agreement with their broker and agent, they agree to pay them a commission, whatever that is. And then that broker offers part of that commission to our brokerage and us to represent you. So except for a one-time additional commission of, and I tell them what that additional commission is, which you don't have to write a check for, it's part of your closing costs at closing, you don't pay us anything for our services. Now that may change in the not too distant future.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm happy to explain to a buyer then that sellers still have the opportunity through their broker to offer a co-broke commission to us to represent them. If they choose not to do that, or if they choose to offer a commission that would be considered not enough value for us to represent you and provide the service we do, then we either would ask you to make up the difference, or if they're not offering any compensation, then we would simply ask you to cover our commission for our services to help you get the house you want under contract and closed.
And so it sounds like what you're describing is very much our document, which has a place where you would write in an expectant percentage.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep. So that is included in there. And for those of you who are familiar with that document or use that document, as we work towards conclusion around what the changes will require, you'll note that some of that language in that document is going to change. And we are already in the conversation with Andrew Ginter, our broker, and others in the legal profession about how and what that needs to change to, so that it is protecting our agents and very clear to the clients that, you know, as the because cooperative compensation is a part of our environment today, you'll note that the references to a commission being due only cover unrepresented sellers. So that's something that will change inside of that document, and will change inside of Jeff's brilliant scripts that he just shared with us.
I do have one thought about that.
Yeah.
Or anybody on this call that has ever listed a home for sale and put it in the MLS, some sellers, when you tell them what the commission's going to be, they don't blink an eye and they sign the listing agreement. There are other sellers who, either because they think they should or they actually care about the commission, might ask if the commission's negotiable, if you'll do it for less. And the one thing we have found with sellers and with buyers when it is applicable is that as long as you can articulate your value proposition, meaning you can articulate all the things and all the value you bring to the table, ultimately, your prospective clients should be happy to pay whatever you're charging because they want what you have to offer. I believe that in my heart of hearts. Now, there's some people, you know, one of the listing scripts is when they ask if the commission is negotiable, I'm curious, do you care more about what commission you pay or about netting the most money in your pocket when your home sells? And they should say they want to net more money.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, some people are pound foolish and penny wise, or however you say that. And they think the commissions are important. If you can demonstrate that your sale to list price is 3% higher than the market average, and you charge 1% more in commission, you're netting the seller 2% more. Who wouldn't want that? But you have to be able to articulate it.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with buyers.
Brilliant. So I want to recap a couple of things, and then I want to offer it up to our assembled guests here for a couple of questions, and then get us all out the door with the rest of our evening. So your strategy: identify buyers, have a buyer strategy session. It sounds like you typically do that on a day where you've scheduled showings for properties so that it's a full day together and it makes sense against what they're doing. And then always articulate value, and what you do to help people get what they want, which is purchasing a home.
That is correct, with one exception.
Yes, sir. Rather
than block out time for showing homes and scheduling buyer strategy sessions around that,
yeah,
we schedule, you know, part of the setting the appointment is after you recommend that they meet you at the office, what's better for you, weekdays or weekends? And I only offer that if I'm willing to work on a weekend. If I don't work on a weekend, I won't ask them that. But I always give them two choices, either of which are acceptable to me. Great. So do you prefer afternoon or morning? And that way, once you know when they would like to meet, then you can match that to an opening in your schedule. And then once I've set the buyer strategy session, if there are a few homes to show them after that, I will schedule those showings after the session.
Great. Excellent.
I'm not saying everybody does it that way. I respect anybody that has set times for showing homes. And if they do, then what you said makes perfect sense. Set the buyer strategy session before that showing period, that showing window, so that you go straight from the office to look at homes.
I love that. Rock solid stuff. All right, team. What questions remain unanswered for Jeff? Again, not to be speculative about anything related to settlements, but primarily around his use of the tool that is a buyer representation agreement, and how it's helped him build and sustain his business.
Let me ask one question of everybody on this call before they field questions for me.
Sure.
what I would ask if we were sitting face to face and had done this around a table is, have I said anything that you don't feel like you, in good conscience, could say to a prospective buyer without feeling 100% confident that it's in their best interest? You're not selling anything. You're not trying to trick them. You're not trying to lock them up in some long-term whatever, that in your heart of hearts, there's nothing you heard tonight that you couldn't actually say to a buyer, knowing full well that you are confident, you're sincere, and it's for their best interest. Just ask yourself that question. If the answer is no, then we need to talk a little more about it, or I need to find out what your concerns are or your objections are. Otherwise, if you can, now you just have to learn and train yourself how to do this. Okay, questions? I'm ready, I think.
May I ask a question?
Of course, Debbie.
Okay. So the first thing I want to say, Jeff, is that you're so sincere in what you say that I want to work with you. So what I want to know is,
are you looking to buy, sell, or invest in real estate?
exactly. So what I want to know is, so you and Terry work as a team.
We do.
Does your entire team across the board have this same exact thing? I mean, it's so sincere when you say it. Have you ever
Yes and
heard
no.
the script
Yes and no.
from other agents on your team?
Yes and no. They've all been trained on how to do this. They
Mhm.
all have their own personalities, their own way of doing things. I believe they all do this to some degree,
Uh-huh.
but I'm not in charge of quality control, so I don't periodically ask each buyer's agent to do a buyer strategy session role play with me
Uh-huh.
to see how they're selling houses and they're getting buyer rep agreements signed. So my expectation is that they're doing a credible imitation of what I've just described. It's
Yeah.
something I've developed. You might notice that I kind of say the same thing over and over because I've only done it for 20 years and thousands of times.
It's great. And then, so I have to tell you, I don't use buyer agreements, but I'm going to. I mean, I have them sign the buyer agreement. You know, sometimes I don't have them sign it on the first appointment. I hate to admit that, but I also, you know, don't have the buyer sit-down sessions that you have. It is.
I think that's really critical.
I
In
do
fact,
too. When I hear you, I mean,
let me share this thought. Every now and then, Terry and I have been working with a buyer and we've shown them 10 houses and they haven't written an offer yet. And days and a couple of weeks are going by and all of a sudden the thought pops into my head, something's wrong. This is not going the way I expect it should and would have. In a case like that, we will invite the buyer back to sit down again and do another buyer strategy session to basically figure out what's changed, what have we misunderstood, did we hear something wrong? Because if we were listening and if nothing's changed and we understood everything, we should have found a house buy. Now, I admit in the current market, because there's such a shortage of listings, that expectation can change drastically. I will also say this is important. A couple of years ago, when everybody was doing Zillow and Zillow was
right.
Advertising, talk to a buyer, schedule a showing right now. And one day Ryan came into the office, maybe it was our Tuesday morning huddle, and he said, you know, in the current world, buyers expect immediate gratification. When they call to see a house, they want to see a house today. So I am encouraging everybody to do one driveway showing. And if they want to buy that house, go back and write an offer. And if they don't, suggest that it would be appropriate to sit down so that we can show you a house that does meet your criteria and you can buy it. Okay. At first, that rankled me. My hair was up. I was in a bad mood. And then finally I said, all right, wait a second. This is ridiculous. Ryan's right. The world has become what it has. And if I'm going to become a dinosaur and insist on they come to the office, they're going to call somebody that'll show them the house.
Correct.
So what we did was we started taking one driveway showing. Rarely did they write an offer. So then the recommendation was, I'm not surprised. It's very rare that a buyer sees a house online and it's the one they want to buy. So here's how we've had great success helping our buyers. You come back to the office either now or if it's convenient or another time. We'll go over what you're looking for. We'll actually set up a program to find you the right house. And usually they would do that. Also, it's highly inconvenient, notwithstanding what Ohio real estate law is, to meet somebody in the driveway of the house they want to see, whip out a consumer guide and say, would you sign this on the hood of my car?
Right.
So in that case, you stretch the law a little bit and you do it at the next meeting because it's just not convenient to sign it in the driveway.
Right.
So I hope that answers your question.
It does. It's so enlightening and I'm so impressed. It's a natural, it just flows off your tongue.
Jeff, you made a comment when we were chatting last week. You have a very specific reason you always say the same thing.
All right. One of my favorite sayings is good liars have to have good memories. And the reason I am so enamored with that saying is I got a lot of stuff rattling around in this old brain of mine. So I often don't remember what I had for dinner last night. And the reason I love scripts and dialogue so much is number one, once you memorize them and internalize them, they don't sound like scripts anymore. These all were scripts and dialogues that I've been regurgitating, but they don't sound that way. That's number one. Number two, if I always say the same thing in the same situation, I don't have to remember what I said. I think of it like this. If I get called into a court of law because a buyer of ours was unhappy about something and hired an attorney, the attorney writes me a letter, and now I got to go before the board or in a court of law or whatever. And if the lawyer says to me when I'm on the stand, Jeff, isn't it true that you said this to the buyer? And if it's not something I would normally say, I'm probably going to answer like this, which I think has tremendous credibility. Actually, I don't remember that specific conversation, so I can't say for sure what I did say. But here's what I always say in that situation. So I would say 99% plus that that's what I said. How are you going to argue with that? It was 2 years ago or a year ago. I don't remember what we said, but here's what I always say in that situation. So I can't imagine I would have said anything but that.
Yeah, it's powerful in so many different ways. You don't have to think hard. You don't have to think on your feet. You don't have to worry that you've misled or or you've maligned anybody because you've thought about and practiced what you're going to say and when you're going to say it and how you're going to say it and why you're going to say it.
Yeah, it makes it a lot easier. One of our top listing partners on our team recently said in a team meeting, I don't want to ever have to think about what to say next. I want to automatically know what I'm going to say next so that I can be in the moment, that I can be present and listen to what they're saying. If you're always thinking about what to say next, you're not listening 100%. And they can tell, that shows, whether it's on the phone or face-to-face. The key is to become so confident and so practiced at the things you need to say in the various situations you find yourself in that you can really be engaged and listen. Because great listeners provide great service. It's unavoidable.
There's the quote of the night. Great listeners provide great service. It's unavoidable. You can't help but deliver on your clients' needs if you're really dialed in on them.
Yeah, if you're in this for the right reason, if you really love helping people, if you really love helping people find and buy houses or sell houses, if that's really what floats your boat, how can you do anything but?
All right. Any other questions? or just positive feedback for Jeff? Jeff, you were phenomenal. I'll start with the positive feedback. Absolutely brilliant.
That's more than kind. And I'd love to share that. I just take this for granted because I learned how to do it. I practiced it until, what do they say? 10,000 hours to achieve world-class mastery. I don't know that I've done this for 10,000 hours. It doesn't really matter. The reality is, because I believe in my heart of hearts that this is the best thing to do for our clients, I do it over and over, and I love doing it. So it becomes easy. It's second nature. It's fun. Yeah, I wish I could swing a golf club like I could do these scripts. It ain't gonna happen.
That's brilliant. Well, Jeff, you're, you opened by talking about you got into a room and you got exposed to other agents who were willing to share how they found their success. And here we are a little over 20 years later, and you're doing the same thing. You're a great example of the culture of this company and a great example of the positive culture of our industry. So thank you again for bearing all here this evening.
You are very welcome. And let me just suggest, if anybody wasn't taking notes or doesn't quite understand something they heard tonight, by tomorrow, or if you just have a question, feel free to email me or send me a text. I'm around. I'm not busy 24/7, so I've always got time to answer a question. And I love doing it because, if all of us will elevate the level at which we do our profession, it's good for the buyers and sellers out there. It's good for the public. It's good for our industry. It's good for our market center. It's good for Keller Williams. It's good for all of us. So I'm here to help and glad I could share.
Excellent
job.
stuff, Jeff. All right,
Great
team, we're right here at 7:30, so we're gonna clip it off. This recording will go up. If you want to watch those scripts and dialogues from Jeff on repeat, I'd recommend it. Put them in your headphones, listen to them while you go for a run. You'll be saying them just like him before long.
Yeah.
But take advantage of that. It's a great thing.
One last comment. Don't strive to say it just like me. Say it just like you, so that it sounds natural, effective, and conveys all the same concepts. Understand the concepts first. The words will follow.
Can't say it any better than that. Jeff, thank you again so
My
much.
pleasure.
Huge.
My pleasure.
Thank you all for being here. More to come next week. Have a great
Thanks,
night.
Jeff.